All right, let's dive right into this explainer. If you're studying Indian history, you know the independence story is usually framed around a few massive defining moments. But, well, history is rarely that simple, is it? Today, we are going to completely unpack the foundations of Indian resistance, looking specifically at those crucial, yet honestly often forgotten rebellions that went down way before 1857.
It's a classic exam question, right? Did India's freedom struggle actually begin in 1857? To answer that accurately and to really wrap your head around the mechanics of colonial resistance, we have to rewind the clock decades before the Great Uprising. We need to figure out where the real groundwork was laid, because 1857 absolutely did not happen in a vacuum. We have a lot of crucial historical data to cover today, so here's our roadmap. We'll hit the first sparks of resistance, do a case study on the Vellore Mutiny, explore forgotten tribal revolutions, analyze the 1857 explosion, compare regional versus unified strategies, and finally, look at the foundation for 1947. Let's get to it.
Section 1. First Sparks of Resistance, the Early Pioneers. Let's look at the warriors who stood up against colonial expansion early on.
Tracking this chronologically, 1857 wasn't some sudden, isolated event out of nowhere. It was literally the culmination of revolts building massive momentum for over half a century. You go from the Polygar revolts in 1799, right into the Vellore Mutiny in 1806, then the Paika Rebellion of 1817, and the huge Santhal Rebellion in 1855, which brings you right to the doorstep of the Great Uprising.
So who were the early architects of this resistance? In South India, during the Polygar revolts, you had fierce warrior chiefs like Veerapandiya Kattabomman, who famously refused to pay those unfair British taxes. To the British, he was a rebel, but to his people, an absolute protector. When he was executed in 1799, the resistance continued under the Marutha brothers, Maruthu Pandiyar, who actually issued one of the earliest calls for Indian independence. Then you've got Bakshi Jagabandhu leading the Paika Rebellion in Odisha, and Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu driving the Santhal Rebellion in eastern India.
Section 2. Case Study, the Vellore Mutiny. Let's examine a highly tactical precursor that happened right inside the military.
Walk through this step by step with me to see exactly how British overreach triggered a violent rebellion. Step 1. The British introduced these highly offensive dress codes and religious restrictions, completely alienating both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. Step 2. In response, Indian sepoys snap, rebelling overnight inside the Vellore fort and taking down over 100 British soldiers. Step 3. The British brutally crushed the revolt within hours. But Step 4 is the real kicker here. It exposed this dangerous, undeniable truth for the empire. Their own Indian troops could turn on them. It was literally a direct preview of 1857.
Section 3. Forgotten Tribal Revolutions. Because resistance wasn't just in the forts, it was in the forests.
A crucial thing to remember is that this fight was fiercely fought in the villages by India's tribal communities. Whether it's the Paika Rebellion of 1817, which, by the way, many historians consider India's true first freedom struggle, or the Santhal Rebellion, they shared some major systemic grievances. We're talking rampant land seizures by the administration, totally exploitative taxation, terrible abuse by landlords and moneylenders, and aggressive British interference with their local culture. These economic and cultural grievances were the exact fuel needed for a revolution. Just to put the sheer timeline into perspective, get this, 2. That is the number of years before 1857 that the Santhal Rebellion shook eastern India. Led by Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu, they mobilized tens of thousands of tribal fighters in 1855. It just goes to show you that massive, localized anti-colonial momentum was hitting an absolute boiling point right before the Great Uprising. Section 4. The 1857 explosion. The moment all those underlying tensions finally erupted. You absolutely have to know these major leaders who spearheaded the 1857 uprising across North India. Make sure you can easily list Rani Lakshmibai, Bahadur Shah Zafar, Nana Sahib, Tatya Tope, and Begum Hazrat Mahal. They successfully harnessed all that accumulated anger over religious fears, economic exploitation, and military discrimination that had been building up for decades. What makes 1857 so incredibly unique is the massive demographic shift. For the very first time, you had soldiers, farmers, princes, workers, and everyday civilians rising up together. Unlike those earlier revolts that were mostly isolated to specific groups, like just the sepoys in Vellore or just the Santhals out east, 1857 united entirely different social classes across huge parts of India. It was a total game changer. Section 5. Regional versus unified strategies. Let's break down the shift in tactics. This is a core concept you'll want to lock in. The big difference here is that the pre-1857 methods were highly regional. They were isolated, deeply focused on preserving specific regional identities and tackling local grievances, like Kattabomman fighting a local tax. Contrast that with the unified strategy we saw in 1857. That movement spread across multiple regions, united diverse social groups, and directly challenged British rule on a massive scale. It was so intense, it actually forced the dissolution of the entire East India Company.
If you need a simple way to remember this transition, think of the brush fire analogy. Those pre-1857 revolts, they were like isolated brush fires. Super intense, very destructive, but ultimately localized to one area. 1857, on the other hand, was the massive forest fire, where all those individual sparks finally connected and burned together as one.
Section 6. Foundation for 1947 Independence. The lasting impact of everything we've discussed. Looking back, the legacy of those pre-1857 revolts is absolutely massive. They created vital resistance networks, inspired future generations of freedom fighters, and preserved those crucial regional identities. But mostly, they proved that British rule could actually be challenged. Without the Sannyasis, the Polygars, the Paikas, the Santhals, and those brave Vellore Sepoys proving the empire wasn't invincible, the eventual explosion of 1857 might literally never have happened. I want to leave you with this really powerful thought from today's explainer. India's freedom struggle did not begin in 1857. It began the moment exploitation began. From the forests of Bengal to the forts of Tamil Nadu, these unnamed revolutionaries weren't fighting for fame. They fought for dignity, their land, and their culture. They poured the true, sturdy, concrete foundation for the modern independence movement that eventually succeeded in 1947. So, how does regional resistance become a unified nation? Think about how those isolated brush fires of defiance ultimately forged the identity of a modern unified India. It's not just history, it's a masterclass in how localized resistance eventually builds a nation. Keep that in mind, and I will see you in our next